Hello, everyone. Today, we will travel back to the 1860s, a very hard time for the United States. The country was divided. The Union, which was the northern states, and the Confederacy, which was the southern states, were fighting a big war. This was the American Civil War. While America was fighting, the big countries in Europe were watching. Great Britain and France, two of the most powerful countries, were thinking about helping the southern states, the Confederacy. But there was a big country that chose a different way. This country was the Russian Empire. Russia chose to support the United States government. This was a very important and interesting story. We will find out why Russia helped the Union and how this help changed the course of the war. Chapter 1: A Lonely Bear and a Divided Eagle. To understand this story, we must first look at the world in the early 1860s. The world was a very different place. Two big nations, the Russian Empire and the United States, were both facing big problems, and these problems helped to bring them together. In the United States, a great sadness was happening. The country was split into two parts. The Union was the northern states, and the Confederacy was the southern states. They were fighting about many things, but the biggest issue was slavery. The southern states wanted to leave the United States to keep the system of slavery. The northern states, led by President Abraham Lincoln, wanted the country to stay as one and wanted to end slavery. The war was terrible. Many thousands of people were dying. At the same time, in Europe, the Russian Empire was in a difficult position. Just a few years before, in 1856, Russia had lost a big war called the Crimean War. This war had been against Great Britain and France. After the war, relations between Russia and these two countries were very bad. Russia felt lonely and weak on the world stage. They were isolated. Austria was also a rival, and Prussia was not a clear friend. Russia needed a strong country to be its friend, a country that did not like Great Britain and France. The United States was a perfect match. Then, in 1863, another problem made things even worse. There was a big rebellion in Poland. Poland at that time was a part of the Russian Empire. People in Great Britain and France were very loud in their support for the Polish rebels. They wanted to start a war with Russia to help Poland. They used newspapers and speeches to make people angry at Russia. This was a big problem for Russia. At the same time, the southern states of the Confederacy were also trying to leave the United States. The Confederacy's leaders tried to say that their fight for freedom was the same as the Polish fight for freedom from Russia. They hoped that Great Britain and France would see this and help them, but this idea did not work. Russia was now against any group that wanted to leave a country because of the Polish rebellion. The United States was also against any group that wanted to leave because of the Confederacy. This created a strong bond between the two nations. So, the stage was set. The United States was fighting a war at home. Great Britain and France were thinking about helping the Confederacy. And the Russian Empire was in Europe. But they were looking for a strong friend to help them in their rivalry with Great Britain and France. This is the world in which Russia made its important decision to support the Union. Chapter 2. The Same Fight for Freedom. In this chapter, we will look closer at why Russia and the United States felt a special connection. The friendship between these two countries was based on more than just a common enemy. It was based on a shared fight for a very important idea: freedom. But the word freedom meant different things to different people at that time. The Russian government, on behalf of Tsar Alexander II, sent a letter to the United States government. This was a diplomatic message that showed friendship and support. The letter was written by the Russian Foreign Minister, Prince Alexander Gorchakov. The letter said that Russia was a good friend of the United States. It said that Russia believed in the importance of the Union and that the United States should stay as one country. This was a very important thing to say. While other European countries were not sure who to support, Russia was the first to say, "We support the Union." This was a big help for the Union. Prince Gorchakov's letter was a smart diplomatic move. But the real reason for the friendship was deeper. First, Russia and the United States were both fighting against groups that wanted to split their countries. Russia was fighting against the Polish Rebellion. The United States was fighting against the Southern states, the Confederacy. This made them feel a connection. Both countries were trying to keep their nation as one. Second, the people in Russia saw a connection between their own history and the American Civil War. In 1861, just a few years before the war started, Tsar Alexander II had freed the serfs. Serfs were people who were forced to work on the land of a rich landlord. They were not slaves, but they were not free. The Russian people and the Russian government saw the fight against slavery in America as very similar to their own fight to free the serfs. For Great Britain and France, the word freedom in the 1860s was often linked to groups that wanted to leave a country. They supported the Polish people who wanted freedom from the Russian Empire. And they were thinking about supporting the southern states, who wanted freedom from the Union. But for Russia and the United States, the word freedom meant something else. For the United States, it meant freeing the slaves. For Russia, it meant freeing the serfs. So, while Great Britain and France were thinking about helping groups that wanted to split up a country, Russia and the United States were thinking about bringing more freedom to their people by keeping their countries together. This created a strong reason for the two countries to become friends. So, the first act of support from Russia was a diplomatic one. It was a letter that showed a strong belief in the Union and a clear message to other European countries. It made it more difficult for Great Britain and France to get involved. This was just the first part of Russia's help. The next part was even more exciting and surprising. Chapter 3. The naval fleets arrive. The most famous and most important event of Russia's support for the Union happened in the year 1863. This was a very hard year for the Union Army. Many battles had been lost, and the war was going very badly. Great Britain and France were getting closer to officially saying that the Confederacy was a new independent country. But in this difficult time, something very surprising and wonderful happened for the Union. In September 1863, a Russian naval fleet arrived in the harbor of New York City. It was a group of Russian warships. A few weeks later, another Russian naval fleet arrived in the harbor of San Francisco. This was a huge event. The arrival of the Russian ships was a big surprise to everyone. The people of New York and San Francisco were so happy. They saw the Russian sailors as their friends. They threw big parties and had parades for them. The American people welcomed the Russians as heroes. But why did Russia send its ships? The reason was a clever strategic move. A strategic move is an action that is planned to give a country a good position. At that time, there was a lot of tension in Europe. Russia was having problems with Great Britain and France because of the Polish rebellion. Russia was afraid that a war could start in Europe. If a war did start, Great Britain and France could easily use their navies to attack Russia. So the Tsar gave a secret order. He told the captains of the ships that their main job was to get into a position to attack British and French commercial ships. Their mission was to raid and hunt down British and French trade ships if a war started. The Russian Navy was not as big as the British or French navies. But having these ships in American ports was a secret threat. It made Great Britain and France think twice before starting a war with Russia. For the United States, the arrival of these ships was a huge diplomatic victory. It was a big sign to Great Britain and France that Russia was on the side of the Union. It was a clear message that said, "Do not get involved in the American Civil War." It made Great Britain and France much more afraid to help the Confederacy. The American government welcomed the Russian ships. This showed that if a war did happen between Russia and the European powers, the United States would be a friendly neutral to Russia. The Russian Navy could use American ports for safety and supplies. The presence of the Russian fleet was a major reason that helped keep Great Britain and France out of the war. They did not want to risk a war with Russia. Chapter 4. The Impact and Value of Russia's Support. The arrival of the Russian fleets was a big event, but what was the real impact? The help from Russia was not in the form of soldiers, money, or weapons. The Union was a very rich and industrialized part of the United States. It had a strong economy and a large population. It did not need money or weapons from Russia. The Union also had more than enough food for its army and people. So, the help from Russia was not material. It was diplomatic and strategic. This kind of help was even more important than money or weapons. Here is why. Stopping intervention. The most important thing was that Russia's support made it very hard for Great Britain and France to officially recognize the Confederacy. As we learned, Great Britain and France were thinking about this. If they had done it, the Confederacy would have been seen as a real country. This would have given the Confederacy a lot more power and hope. The Russian ships in American harbors were a big reason to stop. Great Britain and France did not want to risk a war with Russia, especially with Russian ships so close to their trade routes. So, they decided to stay out of the war and not help the Confederacy. Secret orders to cooperate. The Tsar also gave a secret order to the Russian captains. They were told to help the U.S. Navy if any Confederate ships attacked U.S. Navy ships. This shows that the support was more than just a show. It was a real plan to help the Union. Boosting morale. The arrival of the Russian ships was a huge morale boost for the Union. Morale is the feeling of hope and confidence. At the time, many people in the Union were tired and sad about the war. The news that a big and powerful country like Russia was on their side was a great thing to hear. It made the people feel that they were not alone. It showed them that their cause was right and had the support of other countries. It gave them new hope and strength to continue fighting. A show of friendship. The Russian government put a lot of effort into making this friendship public. They wanted everyone to see that Russia and the United States were close. This was because Russia was very afraid of a new war with Great Britain and France, a war like the Crimean War. By showing the world that America was their friend, Russia made Great Britain and France less likely to attack. The plan worked, and a new war did not start. The United States did not want to provoke Great Britain, and France either. The most important thing for the U.S. was to keep the two big European powers from helping the Confederacy. So, the goals of Russia and the U.S. were aligned. So, the value of Russia's help was not in the number of guns or dollars. It was in the diplomatic and psychological power it gave to the Union. It helped to make the Confederacy a lonely country on the world stage and gave the Union the confidence it needed to keep fighting. This was a very big and very important reason for the Union's victory. Chapter 5. A Friendship Forged in War. The relationship between the United States and the Russian Empire during this time was special. It was a friendship that was built on shared interests and a common goal. After the Civil War ended, the friendship between the two countries continued. One of the most famous examples of this is the purchase of Alaska. In 1867, just 2 years after the Civil War ended, Russia sold Alaska to the United States. Why did Russia sell it to the United States? Financial need. Russia needed money. The American Civil War was very expensive for the United States, but it also made the Russians see that their land in Alaska was not very profitable. They needed money. Strategic reasons. Russia was still worried about Great Britain. They believed that Great Britain might one day take Alaska for free. They also believed that the United States was a good friend, and that it was better to have a friendly neighbor in the Pacific. Friendship. The diplomatic support during the Civil War had created a strong bond between the two countries. The Russians felt a real friendship with the Americans. They felt that they could trust the Americans to be good neighbors and to not be a threat. So, the purchase of Alaska was not just a business deal. It was also a sign of the deep friendship that had grown between the two countries during the Civil War. It was a sign of trust and a shared vision for the future. This story of friendship between the United States and Russia during the Civil War is very different from their relationship today. Today, the two countries are often in conflict. But the history of the 1860s shows that there was a time when they were very close friends. They worked together to achieve a common goal: to stop foreign countries from getting involved and to save the Union. The Russian Empire's support for the Union was a very important part of American history. It was a story of a country that stood up for another country in a time of great need. Chapter 6. The Long-Term Significance. Why is this story so important today? What can we learn from it? The story of Russia and the United States in the 1860s is a story of how a small act of support can have a very big impact. The friendship between the two countries was not perfect. It was based on their own self-interests. Russia wanted to make Great Britain weaker, and the United States wanted to win the war. But their interests were the same. They worked together to achieve a common goal. This is a very important lesson in how countries can work together. The story also shows us the power of diplomacy. The Russian government did not have to send soldiers to help. They did not have to send weapons. Their actions were all diplomatic and strategic. They sent a letter. They sent ships to a friendly port. These actions were enough to change the course of the war. They showed that a country can be a good ally without fighting in a war. For the United States, this story is a reminder of a very difficult time in its history. It is a reminder that the country was not always the most powerful nation in the world. It was a young country that needed the support of its friends. The support from Russia helped the Union to stay together and to defeat the Confederacy. In the end, the American Civil War was a victory for the Union. It was a victory for the idea that the country should stay together. It was also a victory for the idea that slavery should be ended. The support from Russia was a small but very important piece of this victory. It was a story of two different countries that came together to help each other at a very important time in history. The bear and the eagle, Russia and the United States were friends. This story is an important part of their history. It reminds us that, even in a world of conflict and competition, countries can still find a way to work together for a common interest.